Good morning, friends. Welcome, welcome. Word of God, OBE Journal 2018, number 18. I've touched in various ways on the issue of obsessing entities. But I'd like to reapproach that with some additions. You will discover, if you haven't already, the situation on the lower astral plane or the earth plane when you're out of body, entities which float around, lost and confused, and sometimes malicious. Trying to get what they think they need from either weak-willed, traumatized, timid, or addicted souls on the earth plane. If their issue is addiction to drugs or alcohol or sex or gambling, they will find ways to latch on to earthbound addicts and increase their desire with their own, and making the next high or the search for the next high even more irresistible than it generally is. And by, shall we say, pursuing or nagging mentally or energetically the earthbound addict, they will be present when that addict makes contact with his drug of choice, and will either hover very close to the aura of the earthbound addict, and when that addict passes out of their body during the high, no matter what it's from, they will enter the body, or they will try to, and get the contact high that they believe they need. And the physical oblivion, if you like. And there are a number of out-of-body clairvoyant accounts of people who have seen this in bars and drug dens, with often more than one obsessing entity fighting over the body of an earthbound addict, trying to get in, pushing each other away, etc., etc. This is pretty much the same situation where gambling or sex is the main preoccupation. And depending on their determination and their intense desire, they can be quite successful in this displacement activity. And it goes on all the time. And it's nothing new. It's not the modern world. It's, any time in history. Although most of the literature that you'll find on it is modern, last 100 years or so. And it can be extended, broadened to any obsessive, ritualistic, power-generating human activity. And you might say, Gordon, can you really compare dead Christians attending their physical plane church services of the church that they went to during their physical lives? And no, I can't see any harm in that. But it is the same principle. They have a desire to participate in this habitual activity, and instead of going on to the spirit world proper, because they have doubt issues or guilt issues, or, sinful issues, they stay on the physical plane for a long while or a little while, and they attend their old church, as do sports fans, hanging out at their old haunts and getting to see all the games they want instead of the games they can afford. Another high is there. They don't really want to enter the body of living sports fans, but they do get a huge charge energetically out of the excitement and of the play and the excitement that the physical plane people are feeling. So you see the same principle, although the sports fans and the church people are not destructive particularly of the stability, mental, emotional stability of those they're hanging out with. Whereas the ones that are after the drugs and the booze and, as we'll get to in a moment, violence, do seriously rock the stability, mental stability of those they attach themselves to. There are a number of cases in the archives of people who do this work, like I do. I haven't written an entire book on it, but I mention it in various places. But people like William Baldwin and Louise Arlen Frey and Sue Allen and Natalia O'Sullivan, Wanda Pragnica, all their books are filled with case histories. And obviously there's more, and I've picked up quite a bit from other practitioners that I've had interactions with. So it's this obsessive determination to continue earthly activities. And in some cases, the obsession is addiction, the alcohol, the drugs, the sex, the gambling. They can't hold back. They've been doing it for a lot of their adult lives while here, and when they die, they just want to continue the habit. They can't see any other way. In fact, their addiction overwhelms any other sort of behavior pattern that might be trying to emerge in their astral life. It's like a blockage, a shadow that hangs over them. And there are those that are attracted to violent activity. Dead soldiers aren't always like wildly keen to continue on fighting. Generally, they're happy to get away if they can figure out how. They don't always know, especially if they die quickly. You know, bullet in the head, they weren't sort of a bomb. They're in their astral bodies in a flash, and they don't quite know they're dead. They feel very alive. And but many soldiers are sick to death of it all, and are maybe not glad to be dead, but glad to be free of the duty of participating. And generally, in my experience, don't obsess the living soldiers. Sometimes they try to fight the living bodies of the enemy because they don't quite know they're dead, but it's completely hopeless. They can't do anything. They can't get a latch on the physical plane. So if, at some point they give that up. And but I have discovered that those who are driven by fanatical belief in their cause can be driven onward in death to continue their activities in whatever way they think is useful. And one of the ways they do that, fanatics, is to latch on like an obsessing entity of any type to those of us in society who are mentally and emotionally unbalanced, and sometimes through PSTD or other factors, traumatizing factors, and who have issues, anger issues, racial issues, issues of resentment and hatred, and also who have, well, they don't always have to have access to guns, but that sure makes it easier. If they don't have access to guns, sometimes they're driven to seek out ways of making bombs, sometimes quite amateurishly. But these fanatics, these dead fanatics, are sometimes, but not always, behind the explosion of motivation in some of these shooters and bombers that we see or hear about in our society, where suddenly they just zero in on an attack, whether it's people of another religion that they resent, people of another racial group that they resent, just different types of people. Instead of embracing the wonderful blend of personalities and races and attitudes to life that we have, they want to build a wall around the group that they belong to and depose the perceived advancement of other groups. We see this fanaticism in play all the time, don't we? And I just thought it was time, although I've hinted at this in various blogs and talks before, to bring it all together and suggest to you that in your out-of-body experiences, even when you're, especially when you're meditating, you can do this when you're meditating, I have, and project into the lower astral and ask your guides, if you can't figure out how to get there yourself, or that's your issue, ask your guides to show you, and you will be guided to one or two or more lower astral entities, that are driven by a fanaticism, and you will see how they harass those who are, on the edge, thinking about it, but maybe don't have the courage or quite the steam power of anger to pull it off, and push them over the edge and get them to do it. Now this, you will be able to see this in your third eye, in your inner eye. I've done it plenty of times. I don't see why you couldn't do it. It may feel a little ghoulish, a little improper, a little unethical. But if you do it in terms of your own education, I think it's justified. I would not think that you would be able to dissuade these people, but you can always try. Fanatics are generally fanatics, and mostly they are convinced of the superiority of their motive and the holiness of their desire. They've brought it over from the indoctrination they received while still alive. Now, this phenomenon is a continuation of what you will read of in the archives of others. I was meant to mention with the other authors, there's an old book called 30 Years Amongst the Dead, which is still in print. You can track it down. And it's from, I think, the 1920s and 1930s, where a husband and wife team track down some of these earthbound entities and talk to them and talk them out of their nasty habits. And what they find are people that are pushing robbers to rob and murderers to murder on an individual level, not on a fanatical ideology level. But it's much the same. And perhaps because these criminals are not driven by fanaticism, but by bad habits, destructive habits, mercilessness, ruthlessness, they can emerge from that pattern. But it's very much the same thing. And one of the practitioners I mentioned, Wanda Praknika, her book is filled with case histories of entities that push people to murder. And it's quite bone-chilling, but I suggest you get a hold of it and have a look at it. It's a similarity of motive, and that what we've seen many times in our explorations is an acting out of the principle of like attracts like. It's in exactly the same way as when you're outside of this particular inquiry, you'll be out of body, and you will find yourself participating in activities with groups of people that you're quite copacetic with, whether it's a picnic or some sort of sports activity that's continued on in the astral plane, lots of them are, or theatrical or concertizing activities. You're doing something that you like, and you're with other people who also like it, and you join your energies together. And So it's the same principle all the way down, although obviously some are, considerably more destructive than others. And one could certainly not approve of it. But I just want you to see it's the same principle in operation. So in recent, well, when I say recent times, you're probably thinking, I mean 5 years. In the last 50 years, I've noticed, I'm 65 now, so, I've been looking at the major media newspapers for a long time. And I noticed in cases where someone who is a schizophrenic or something similar by our current medical definitions, when they've committed a violent crime, they will often talk in the trial of the voices that harass them and make fun of them and push them through nagging to commit a crime. And I've seen this many times, and I suspect you have too, but I want you to see that it's a pattern. Again, it's the schizophrenics hear the voices urging them to do things, nasty, mean, horrible things to others. And of course, it's by dead spirits, the obsessing entities that have done similar stuff when they were alive and want to continue the activity because they still have the anger, the hatred, the resentment, and feel like they are justified in seeking some sort of vengeance. And also, if they've been in spirit for a while as an earthbound ghost, they realize there is no punishment there. They can wander around and do what they want. They might have died thinking that there would be punishment, and they may still feel that there's punishment farther on in spirit, but as an earthbound ghost, there is no punishment. So they feel like they're getting away with things, and they feel like they can encourage others to participate in the same violent, destructive behaviors and continue to get away with it. And they don't really care. They're heartless. They don't care about their victims or the victims of the victims. Just as we have sociopathic and psychopathic criminals who have no conscience about the destruction they wreak, here on Earth we have spirits, earthbound spirits, who are much the same. So when you hear of testimony given in court by a mentally disturbed person who's gone off their meds and starts to hear the voices again, believe me, those voices are real. They represent spirits that are earthbound, that want to inflict violence, suffering, pain on others using schizophrenic or very weak-willed people to do the dirty for them, and that's how it all happens. Those voices are real. Now, I emphasize this, and other practitioners will too, because conventional medical psychology, psychiatry, they don't believe in spirits. They don't believe in the soul. They operate on a mechanistic, materialistic, scientific basis, of which there's no room for the soul outside of the body. So they do not recognize the soul in us, or the soul freed by death floating around as a ghost. So in the main, there's a few, but they don't support this view. So you can avoid getting into, a coffee shop or cocktail party arguments on that one, because you're not going to get anywhere. I would just suggest do the research and do the experimentation on your own. And your guides will help. And you will not be poisoned by the destructive activity of these obsessing entities if you protect yourself, which I'm sure you've learned to do already. You don't need me to tell you that, I don't think. And in knowing all this, whether you are accepting it from me or accepting it from me and doing the research and doing the experimentation, you will find that there might be the odd case where you can help out and dissuade someone from doing what they're going to do. But there'll be lots of cases where you could just observe and you can't help. So understand that such things will go on regardless of your desire to ameliorate the condition of those who are suffering. But it will be an education for you. It will be an increase in your knowledge and your understanding, particularly of how creation and destruction are balancing forces on the physical plane. On many levels, of course. We see it all with tornadoes and fires. Fires right now, there's lots of them, destroying things in a huge rush. And houses, small villages and towns. And these are the forces of nature who have their activities to pursue and their justifications for what they do. And despite the little bit of testimony I've been able to uncover from other psychics and clairvoyants interacting with nature spirits, they don't seem to care that much about what gets destroyed in the force of their activities by fire or flood or storm. They see what they're doing as natural, as part of the cycle of life. And maybe they're right, but it does cause much suffering for us on the physical plane, no doubt about it. So I tend to see all of what I've just described as part of the cycle of creation and destruction on the physical plane. And I'm not sure that one can take a sort of messianic approach, and change the basic factors of life. And if that pronouncement depresses you, I suggest you think it over. Because in out-of-body travel, you're going to find a lot of this sort of thing. That many souls are engaged in activities that you don't approve of, you don't like, you find abhorrent. But ultimately, it's all illusion. It's all a learning experience, shrouded in illusion. As all learning experiences are, we create illusions, or we participate in the creation of illusions in order to test ourselves and see how we do. And this is true all throughout our incarnational journey. Because even as primitive, unevolved souls living in caves or whatever, we have come to Earth unloading most of our spiritual knowledge before incarnating, and are, basically learning to cope with a hostile environment. And in those early lives, there's much that oppresses us and much that we cannot claim victory over. And as we progress through thousands of years, we do claim victory over more and more of the challenges of the natural world. And yet, even in our tech-savvy, leisure, I was going to say leisure obsessed, but sometimes that leisure is forced upon us through lack of work. Modern society, I see, we're still at the mercy of floods and fires. I look at I hear testimony from people in California who just said they saw the smoke, and in half an hour later they were in their cars fleeing like mad. Sometimes having to leave their cars and run, and leaving almost all their possessions behind. Now, I mean, if that isn't helplessness in the face of nature's wrath, what is? And recent floods in Italy, collapsing all sorts of forests. Usually, storms don't take down the entire forest, but I noticed in this case they did. Nature's power is ongoing and undeniable, regardless of our ability to build much stronger buildings and supply ourselves with all kinds of technology that is useful in storms and fires. But I see much around us that suggests we're still at the mercy of nature. Seriously at the mercy. Now, where I live in southern Canada, we don't have to face much like that. What we get to face are pretty intense snowstorms from time to time, but we've learned to cope with that. And they're not nearly as destructive as what other parts of the world have to cope with. But the testimony is there, and there'll likely be more today. And the best we can do as caring human beings is to spread sympathy and love to those who are in danger. Their own emergency services will take care of them as best they can. I don't think there's much point in us rushing down there trying to help out. But certainly love and compassion is always worthwhile. And the same for these personal cases that you might discover out of body if you choose to so travel. The dance of death between aggressor and victim is a complex one. And sometimes you can do nothing about it other than shed your share of compassion and love upon them both. Sometimes, if you're strong enough and the aggressor is wavering in their determination, you can influence them. It's not impossible. But on the other hand, it's not easy. It's not difficult, it's not easy, it's just there. And with that summation, I will take my leave and wish you well on all your activities in and out of the body. And we'll talk again soon.